Well, hello, everybody. Good morning and welcome to the Transit Management Committee and Rail Management Committee joint meeting. I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. It looks like we have a quorum. So we'll start with the call of the roll. Pat?
Good morning, everyone. City of Avondale, Matt Dudley.
Present.
City of Buckeye, Dan Cotterman. City of Chandler, Jason Crampton.
Here.
City of El Mirage, Autumn Grooms. Here. Town of Fountain Hills, Dave Trimble. Town of Gilbert, Mary Goodman. City of Glendale, Kevin Phelps.
Here.
City of Goodyear, Winnette Reed.
Present.
Maricopa County, Elijah Levon. City of Mesa, Jody Sorrell. City of Peoria, Kevin Burke. City of Phoenix, Mario Paniagua.
Here.
Town of Queen Creek, Bruce Gardner.
Here.
City of Scottsdale, Mark Melanchenko.
Here.
City of Surprise, Tracy Montgomery.
Here.
City of Tempe, Andrew Ching. City of Tullison, Reyes Medrano. Chair, we can proceed.
Okay, thank you, Pat. So just a couple of reminders. If you have a question or a comment to make, just let me know. If you're online, you can just speak, turn your microphone off, and let me know you're there and you have a question. Otherwise, please keep your computer muted or your microphone muted when you're not speaking. So we'll go to the first item, public comment. The public will be provided with an opportunity to address the committees on non-agenda items and all action agenda items for the joint, the RPTA, and the VMR meeting agendas. Up to 3 minutes will be provided per speaker. So do we have any cards, Pat?
Mr. Crowley?
Mr. Crowley?
Y'all happen to catch yesterday's front page of the paper with its statements about the legislature? Oh, you didn't? Oh, bummer. It had the conflict between the legislature and all the rest of it and what our situation is on transit. I know this isn't the first time that she's been unaware, but I also then look at one of the things you have in here to ensure safety and security for our riders in the budget. Northwest Extension Security, number 4, $500,000. And this is the transit part of the meeting, right? Rather than the rail. So I just find it fascinating that to ensure security of our riders, it's $500,000 to a rail facility that doesn't even exist yet. And then in the governance and such, we're going to be spending $304,000. But my favorite part of all this stuff, and that's to sustain and grow the system. To me, being one of the ones that wrote Prop 400, to sustain and grow the system, routes and buses, and also infrastructure. Now, you guys are the managers. I don't know how many of you are actually managers. Over at MAG, when they have the managers meeting, it's all the managers of each of your communities. But then RPTA and Valley Metro Rail are the stepchild. In fact, Valley Metro is the most stepchild, because if you look at what's in here and it's saying what you're going to be spending money on, you want to get 60 more employees. Now, how does that put one damn bus, one stop, or one route out there by getting 60 more employees? Because with what I'm seeing with what you do, as not quite managers, when you look at staff and that, and it being 40% of the budget, how is it that what their production is because, like I said, I don't see any where we're going to be doing any more routes. I don't see where you budgeted where we're going to be acquiring any more buses. Because when we wrote it, it was to be eventually 24/7 with 3 to 5 minute frequency where it needed to be. But what we've got is you saying that because back in the 1980s, when we wrote it and said, these are routes that need to be 5 more seconds, please. That these are the routes that we had to come up with. Well, most of your communities, except for Mesa, were considered towns because the size was so small.
Thank you, Mr. Crowley. Are there any other speakers? Thank you, Pat. That'll take us to item 2, which is the Chief Executive Officer's Report. Jessica Mefford-Miller will update us on her report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, members of the committees. I'd like to just update you on a few items this morning. Number 1 is ridership. Just want to give a quick update. Ridership is reported here through the month of April. We don't yet have our month of May finalized yet. Ridership fell slightly on the bus side. We have been having conversations and working collectively with the City of Phoenix and on the fare boxes and on the automated passenger counters to ensure that we have accurate data fidelity for our ridership across all modes. We're struggling with bus since the update of the fare boxes. There may be an adjustment to ridership moving forward from that. That might be accounting for some of that dip in ridership. It does not seem to be an actual dip in ridership. We are seeing an increase in rail ridership of 17.5% year over year. I would expect a more consistent increase on bus ridership. And we're also beginning to see the return of commuters via our express and rapid routes, signalizing a pointing to a more normal travel trend. Commuter ridership in West Valley is rising slightly. In Phoenix, in particular, the rapids are raising significantly. And streetcar just hit a monthly record with 80,000 boardings in the month of April. So a very strong spring for streetcar. We're making great progress on our workforce vacancies. I want to highlight operators here today. While we're continuing to struggle in West Valley, and we did have an in-depth meeting with them, or a series of meetings really today, focused on performance of the West Valley contract. I'm confident that we'll get some movement there. We are seeing tremendous improvement in operator availability on the East Valley operations and maintenance contract, and on the ACI light rail and streetcar contract. As a result, next slide, please, our missed trips are now down below 1%. So significant improvement. At the peak of last summer, we were missing as much as 5%. And in some months in FY22, in the spring of calendar year 22, we were missing in excess of 7 to 9% of trips on some of our contracts. The contracts call for, there's a varying amount on each contract, but they all call for significantly less than 1% of missed trips. So we are getting there, and that's essential for helping us restore ridership. Looking ahead at our schedule, tomorrow, the Audit Finance Subcommittee will meet for the last time this fiscal year and will review the draft budget for the final time. On June 22nd, I want to make sure that everyone is aware we are having a study session at the request of the board on safety and security. That will begin in this room at 11:15 prior to the board meetings. For July, we do not have a board cycle, though of course we'll begin the August board cycle with our tag in the month of July. May I answer any questions for you?
Anyone have any questions? Okay. Seeing none. Thank you, Jessica, for the report. That takes us to item 3, which is the consent agenda presented for action. Do any members of the committee have items that they'd like to pull for questions for separate discussion? Okay, seeing none, I'd like to request a motion for approval of the consent agenda.
So moved.
Good.
Got a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, please say nay. All right, thank you. Motion passes unanimously. That takes us to item 4, which is the proposed fare policy changes. So I'll turn it back to you, Jessica.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to invite Ken Kessler to the podium to provide a presentation. And I want to clarify that the proposed Fare policy changes being presented to you today are directly associated with the fare collection modernization system and not the forthcoming fare policy study, which the board's instructed staff to do. That will occur over the course of the next year. Mr. Kessler.
Thank you, Jessica. Appreciate that clarification. Yeah, I was going to mention that as well. So as we move forward with the fare collection project, moving towards new technologies to provide to our passengers for fare payment, we wanted to look at the implications to fare policy and make sure we timely move this forward as we're looking at early 2024 to launch the phase 2 reloadable smart card phase of the project. Make sure the fare policy aligns with the fare products that will be offered at that time. So just to go back to some background on the project, a number of goals here related to the project. And of course, it's a regional project, Valley Metro working very closely with the city of Phoenix, as well as our third-party vendors, partners that are on this project, VIX and Incom, and as well the Federal Transit Administration, as they're providing about 80% of the capital cost of this project. And just do want to highlight one of the important goals here that kind of focus us on moving forward with the fare policy is the increased control over the reduced fare programs. So one thing that will be implemented with the new system is the requirement for anybody using a multi-ride reduced fare. So that's somebody using fare capping to earn day passes or month passes would need a reduced fare ID or their account identified as eligible for reduced fare ID. So therefore, only individuals utilizing one ride reduced fares would not have to have that ID or that account identified as eligible for reduced fares. This will help us more strongly address the reduced fare misuse that's been going on for a number of years, and this is one of the primary goals of this project from the very outset. And so it's important that we move this fare policy update forward and work towards that to get the required reduced fare ID as part of the actual fare policy. We'll be launching in the fall an effort to get those cards in the hands of the reduced fare customers. And we want to sort of instill that sense of urgency that this will be required, because today it's not an actual requirement. It's sort of optional. We do provide a reduced fare ID, but not all our customers use it. It's mostly persons with disabilities. So the age-based, the youth and the seniors today do not generally utilize the ID. So just a reminder on some of the key project milestones for the fare collection system. The expedited mobile app with the enhanced trip planning and real-time vehicle location was launched in summer of 21. The mobile fare was just launched here in phase 1 in February. And we're looking here in mid-23 to introduce a reduced fare application website that'll provide an option for folks to, on the web, be able to submit their application for the reduced fare ID, making the process a little simpler and more convenient, so that not everybody will have to come down to the mobility center. And then, of course, looking at early 24 is the reloadable fare cards, phase 2 of the project. And then following that, we actually will be changing out the fare boxes to cash-only fare boxes. So this is just kind of a recap of all that coming forward. And then just a reminder that going forward with the new system in phase 2, we will introduce fare capping, whereby folks can partially pay. Today, they have to buy a monthly pass. They have to outlay $64 up front. This will allow them the opportunity to sort of pay for that, quote unquote, monthly pass over a period of time. So just want to touch on the fare policy outreach and public participation. So highlighting here some of the fare policy changes that we're looking at, as I mentioned, with the phase 2 launch. We'll be going to fare capping, so that will necessitate a change to the fare policy, because today in the fare policy, we have the various pass types and the programs, and we want to include the fare capping concept as part of the fare policy. It's important to note that we will retain some of the pass types for special use programs. Some of our specialty organization-based programs will continue to use passes, but the general public will be able to enjoy the convenience of fare capping. And just to highlight there, the bottom bullet point, there is no proposal to change the base fare at this point. We are proposing to move forward with the existing base fare of $2 or $1 for reduced. And just a visual here, I think may have presented this to this body previously, the visual how fare capping works. Essentially, you can make payments, once a week until you get to a point where you've put enough in there to pay for a $64 monthly pass. And then as you use your card or your mobile fare, you'll earn that pass. And then once you get to the point where for full fare, you've paid $64 or reduced, you've paid $32, and the rest of the month is basically free to the customer. And so here's just an illustration of the proposed fare caps, looking at an all-day fare cap, $4 or 2 for reduced, 20 for weekly, 10 for weekly reduced, and then 64 or 32 for the monthly full and reduced. These are the same prices as we have today. As well there, you'll see on the monthly, there's also a $104 Express Rapid. So for commuters that use Express Rapid service, their cap would be $104, which is the current cost of the Express Rapid monthly pass. Just some more information on the reduced fare account. So everybody will have an account on the system, whether they're using a card or a mobile fare. So it's an account-based system. So when somebody stores value, and if they're using a card, that value is actually stored on the back end in their account. So if they lose that card, they don't lose that value. They're able to replace the card and access that account, much like a debit card that you'd have today. If you lose your debit card, you don't lose your checking account, right? You replace that card, you still have access to it. It'll work the same way. Just a visual here of what the new cards will look like. Our marketing team has come up with through a number of focus groups. Copper is the name, and this has the graphics, and the Platinum program. That's the employer-based program that we currently have today as well. And so just some highlights on the public participation plan and outreach process that we'll be conducting later this summer in August and into September. A number of elements that Hillary and her team will be deploying to engage the public, get their input, kind of inform them of what the proposal is for the new fare system and the new fare products, and get that feedback. And so we're coming through the June board cycle with information only, just to let folks know where we're at on the process with the project, as well as letting the various bodies know that we're going out for the public participation and outreach. Going back through the September work groups after we get that feedback from the public to go through the various bodies there. Fair Policy Working Group. Do want to mention, I'm remiss, I mentioned Fair Policy Working Group. We had a meeting this past Monday to talk about this process. So for those of you that were in the Fair Policy Working Group, you're seeing this again for the second time in a couple of days. And then we're going to go through the various other bodies here listed on the screen, and then going back into October for the committee and board process for approval of the new fare policy that would include the fare capping to be implemented in the future when we actually launch phase 2, as well as the requirement for the reduced fare ID, so we can get the process moving forward for getting those reduced fare IDs and those reduced fare accounts into the hands of our customers out there ahead of the launch of phase 2. So that concludes my presentation on the fare policy update, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ken. Looks like we do have a question from Mr. Burke. We're not able to hear you if you're speaking. Still can't hear you.
Unmute me. How about that? Any better this way?
There we go. We can hear you now.
You got to unmute it on the computer in order to talk through the phone. Who knew? Okay. So, so my question was, and I apologize, I'm late to the fare capping discussion, so only my second meeting back on here. So still getting the details, but what's the policy objective of the fare capping? So, I mean, from a just straight revenue standpoint, it looks like an opportunity to lose revenue. What's the policy gain that we're expecting from this?
Sure, thank you for that question. The policy goal around this is really to make purchasing fares, and especially our most heavily discounted fares more affordable to those who today can't afford that $64 or $104 outlay for a monthly pass, for instance.
So, so the policy would make it more accessible to those who can't afford it? Is that what
Yeah,
we're saying?
so today there's a number of folks, and we don't know what that is, but there's folks out there that are buying perhaps day passes every day, or perhaps they're buying weekly passes multiple times throughout the month, and end up paying more than $64 for monthly cost of their trips on transit. So this is a way for those folks who are maybe living paycheck to paycheck, maybe every week they buy a weekly pass because they get paid on a weekly basis and can't afford the full price of a 31-day pass up front.
I see. Okay. Can't afford the outlay all at once. Okay. Well, that gives me a better understanding. Thank you.
Certainly.
Okay. Does anyone else have any questions on this item? Okay, seeing none. So this item is for information today. You're going to do your outreach over the next few months, and we'll be back in the fall for action on this. So
Correct.
thank you, Ken.
Thank you.
Jessica. That will take us to item 5, which is the Rider Security Survey results. The presentation. I'll
Thank
turn
you,
it back to
Mr. Chair. Members of the committee, I'd like to invite Hillary Foos, our Director of Communications and Strategic Initiatives. Also, Adrian Rees, our Director for Safety, Security, and Quality Assurance, will be here to answer questions. We recently conducted a rider survey. It was focused on a number of different variables, but we were especially interested in understanding our customers' experience across bus and rail with respect to safety and security. Just an important distinguisher. When we talk about safety, we're talking about unintentional harm, in unintentional accident, a slip, trip, or fall, et cetera. When we're talking about security, we're speaking specifically about intentional harm. So think criminal behavior or nuisance behavior or activity. So Hillary, please.
Thank you, Jessica. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, thank you for your time this morning. Between Adrian and myself, we're here to tell you a little bit about a transit rider survey we conducted, really trying to understand sentiments around security. Thank you, Jessica, for that distinction. All right, so a little bit of background. We conducted about 1,000, we got about 1,000 survey results across really the end of December through the first part of February. So across our winter time, really focused on getting that input on their security experiences and sentiments. As you can see there, we conducted about 2/3 of them through intercepts, meaning our team is walking up to passengers, interfacing with them in the field, at bus stops, rail stations, streetcar stops, and we conducted about 400 online as well. You'll see throughout this document that we make comparisons to 2 previous surveys just to give context and give trends. One of them is a 2019 light rail safety and security survey. So when you see 2019 reference, it was a rail specific survey. And then our last full rider satisfaction survey was done in 2018 pre-pandemic. So you'll see references to the rider satisfaction survey from that time period. And the rider satisfaction survey is comprehensive of all riders, bus and rail. So let me jump to some of the results. The good news is that a majority of our riders, about 69%, do feel safe and secure on the system. And you'll see in the details here that that's largely in great part to our increased security presence. As you know, this body and our board has been incredibly helpful to supporting our frontline teams in our hiring and retention efforts, certainly with security, and we're seeing that presence being felt by our riders. You can also see some of the categories have remained the same or improved, including presence, as I mentioned, and also cleanliness inside the transit vehicles. In the orange areas, you'll see there are some areas where we are seeing significant worsening as compared to the 2019 light rail survey, particularly in areas of cited by passengers related to behavior of fellow riders. And I'll go into that in a little more detail in a minute, as well as cleanliness at stations or stops. So certainly we ask why. Why has that perception changed? And you can see here, these are collapsed down versions of what we heard directly from riders. Riders shared that They're seeing more security and again, those hiring efforts are paying off and or they're just generally feeling safe and secure. When asked why their experience has worsened for those passengers that cited that, really those top three categories are related to negative behaviors from fellow riders, references to homelessness, mental health, and substance abuse concerns shared by our passengers. We asked overall about their overall safety and security of the overall system, whether it's remained the same, improved, or worsened. And you can see that a large part of our community have said it's improved or remained the same. There is a significant growth, though, in the worsened with that up to 10% now. And you can see that comparison that overall, we had a greater level of safety and security on the system in 2019. So you can see just a general decrease there. And again, we asked why. Why has their perceptions improved for those that cited that? Again, that presence of inspectors and field security staff was certainly highlighted. And with a small amount of negative mentions, there were small references to the professionalism of that field security staff. And again, that behavior of fellow passengers was again cited. The other element here that we wanted to better understand is what are our riders actually experiencing or witnessing themselves. And so you can see that we are seeing a growth. About 50% of our riders have actually in the last year experienced or witnessed a security incident that creates that feeling of of a lack of safety. And you could see on the right, those incidents range from violent acts like fighting and the use of weapons to intoxicated passengers to verbal arguments or yelling. Then certainly we asked if they experienced those incidents, how did they report them? You can see that, and I think this is sort of human behavior, right? So 1 in 4 of our passengers actually report the incident, and they want to report it largely to frontline staff. They want to report it to a security officer or a bus operator. And so you can see that reference there with the 27%. We've also wanted to understand some of our tools that we have available in the field and understand riders' use and sentiment around those. We have some opportunity to grow our use of Alert Valley Metro. Alert Valley Metro is our safety and security app that provides rail customers the ability to report incidents related to security or maintenance and have those issues responded to in real time. You can see that there's some familiarity with the app, but certainly we have an opportunity to grow that. Similarly, we have about half of our riders aware of our Valley Metro app. Again, the Valley Metro app, to distinguish, is our real-time trip planning app that supports the whole system. It also provides real-time vehicle location. And again, we have a great opportunity to create greater adoption there with 97% of our riders having a smartphone. We concluded the survey with some of the same questions we've used in the past just to understand general satisfaction. And you can see that a good portion of our riders feel satisfied or very satisfied, but it is lower than we were in our 2018 rider satisfaction survey. A bright spot here that's not necessarily shown in this slide, but our streetcar service is receiving the highest overall satisfaction ratings. So it's good to see a new service being so welcomed by the community. And again, certainly we asked what's driving that level of satisfaction. Overall, there was general appreciation for the service. It gets me where I need to go. It's convenient and easy. Some of the negative mentions about related to dissatisfaction was that it's slow and lacks reliability. We did, just a note, we did dig into this data a bit more related to satisfaction and also relating it back to some of our past surveys. Reliability, let me underscore that, is one of those things that really drives a level of satisfaction. As you might imagine, if you're waiting at a stop, you expect the bus to be there at the scheduled time. And so you'll see in our action plan that we're working on, and some of this you may know, to address the reliability and passenger communication experience as well. We always conclude the surveys again with satisfaction, but also the likelihood to recommend. How likely are passengers to recommend the use of Valley Metro and our transit services to their friends or family? You can see that we have a strong majority who would, but it is lower than where we were in 2018. What's interesting on the next slide is we also asked the likelihood to use the service a year from now. So how likely are they to continue riding? And we are seeing a positive trend there that more of our ridership will plan to continue to be using the service looking ahead. And that's really reflective of, we have a strong community of passengers who really rely on our service day to day for their transportation, as their transportation option. So just quick conclusions, as I mentioned, a majority of our riders indicate they do feel safe and secure on the system, largely emphasized by the increased presence of security. There is interest from our riders to see more security, more level of presence. Riders are experiencing greater situations that make them feel uncomfortable or less safe, and they pointed many times to the negative or troubling behavior of fellow passengers. During incidents, 1 and 4, as I mentioned, actually report the incident. They're looking to report that to an actual fellow a human being, to an operator, a security officer, and we have opportunities to certainly grow the usage of some of our technology, as mentioned with our 2 apps. I mentioned streetcar being a bright spot, but we are seeing overall satisfaction declining, with light rail now declining to be more in line with bus rider satisfaction. And there is as I mentioned, a notable decrease in, again, overall satisfaction, not necessarily translating in their likelihood to recommend or likelihood to continue using. So here's a little bit about the action plan, and certainly more of this will be covered. As Jessica mentioned, we're having a board study session here on June 22nd that we will obviously be sharing a bit more of these details. But transit security, right now we're doing a lot of peer research. As we're at this stage, how do we learn from our peers? And so that peer research is being conducted. What are their models? What are their funding sources? What are some of the partnerships they use in the community to improve the rider experience from a security standpoint? We are also investigating the partnerships or potential partnerships with social service agencies who could maybe help with some of those fellow passenger behavior concerns. I mentioned service reliability and passenger communications. Again, that comes up through that satisfaction data that we get. And certainly this body knows we've been working a lot on hiring and retention. Jessica mentioned at the front end of this meeting that we are seeing our on-time performance and the reliability of our service improve. And also we're doing several runtime analyses to help us understand what's happening on the system in order to create improvement. Passenger communications, Jessica also mentioned data reliability. We're working to improve the data that comes in from the systems to create that better passenger notification and experience. And I mentioned June 22nd, we'll be talking about this more fully with the board. So I'm happy to answer any questions between Adrian and myself.
Thank you, Hillary.
Thank you.
Minette, you have a question. We'll start with you.
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hi, Hillary. Thank you for the presentation.
Thank
It was very good, and I think we're all interested in making sure that our riders don't only feel safe, but they are safe.
Yes, absolutely.
And they know what to do in an emergency. So I heard you say that Alert Valley Metro is an app that the light rail riders can use. Can you help me understand what we're doing for the bus, right? Those individuals riding the bus? Do we communicate to those riders what they should do in an emergency? Because I also saw that their first response was notify the operator.
Yeah.
And if the operator is the one that's being targeted or in trouble, what are their options there to help them know what to do in an emergency?
Thank you, Ms. Reed, Mr. Chair, and Adrian, jump in if I miss anything. The bus experience right now, what we instruct passengers to do, if they see something, they say something, and that is either through the operator or, depending on the level of the emergency, to call 911 and use the resources of local law enforcement. That's what passengers are instructed to do today. For rail, we do offer, for actually light rail and streetcar, we do offer Alert Valley Metro. I think everyone in this room would love to see that more greatly expanded. There are just some restrictions and differences that are worth noting. For Alert VM on the rail side, today that staff that responds 24/7 to Alert Valley Metro is located in our Rail Operations Control Center. So literally they're sitting next to the people who are moving the trains, and also there's a security team in there as well. So when we get an alert, we can literally talk to our fellow team members in the room and have that issue resolved. It also helps because we have a dedicated security team on rail that can help resolve Adrian's contracted services. So we have a dedicated team and also a dedicated, we're 28 miles. It's a very finite area that we are responding to versus our 580 square miles of bus service area. So there is greater responsiveness we're able to deploy because of some of the resources we have on rail. I think the concerns historically with considering Alert VM expansion to bus, again, I think there's wide appreciation for how valuable would that be, but it's really how do we respond in real time? That will be the customer's expectation when they text or call something in, they want it to be resolved. And right now we don't yet have the field resources to respond to that in a timely manner. I think over time that could be built up with partnerships from local law enforcement. We also know their resources are constrained, but it's really the concern has been how do we manage customer expectation if ever expanded to bus and have those resources deployed to timely respond to those issues or concerns.
Thank you for that. But you also mentioned that individuals riding the bus are instructed to call 911 or contact the operator. How are they instructed to do?
So there is, and we can maybe do a better job of this, but there is a car card, which is one of the placards around the top of the vehicle that provides that level of instruction. It's also something that we mention on our website. We could probably be populating it or sharing it a bit more widely, but that's today where those instructions are held.
I do thank you for your presentation.
Absolutely.
The events, our current events all across the country. I think it's important that we do look at what we can do for the ridership on the bus.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If I may, Mr. Chair, I'd like to add to that response. So we know that every day 70% of our customers ride the bus, and we recognize what feels like an inequity in having this service available on light rail and streetcar, which, as Hillary mentioned, it is easier to manage that 25 miles and 38 stations as opposed to that 580 square miles of service area. However, Valley Metro has recognized this need to increase security for our customers while they're experiencing bus, whether that be at the bus stop or a transit center or on board the bus itself. In last year's budget cycle, we included a bus security program coordinator position that was approved by the boards, and we have a bus security coordinator in place. He's getting close to the end of his first year, and his primary tasking is building the relationships with our local law enforcement entities, who are often the teams that are tasked with responding to incidents on board bus, whether that be, again, on board the vehicle or at the stop itself. We don't have a dedicated force from Valley Metro like we do in Allied Universal assigned to bus. Some systems, there are a lot of ways to do this, and we're going to dive into this a bit more in the study session. Some systems do have a force that is out on the bus. Even then, though, they have a layered approach where they're relying pretty heavily on our local law enforcement. And so getting to the point where we have those relationships, having that clear understanding and procedure for what the customer does, what Valley Metro does with that information, and then how we summon help is the next step. So that's a very active topic of conversation. And while it would be nice to just push out Alert VM to bus, the customer has a very reasonable expectation that when you contact us to tell us that you feel unsafe or insecure, that something is going to happen. And so we have to work on that. What is going to happen? That responsiveness before we can push out the tool.
Thank you.
If members of the committee, if I can add onto what Jessica and Hillary both said also, is that with Dave Munley, the bus security coordinator, he will be providing an update on his activities over the last year. We see the activities that Dave has been conducting at our direction with the bus operators. I see the same that could occur with Alert VM if it's rolled out correctly on the bus side, primarily as an intelligence gathering tool. So if you look at the palm cards we just completed, which are basically provides a QR code, it's a see something, say something, but in an emergency, call 911. Crimes in progress need to be diverted to public safety immediately. But if there is something systemic you're seeing on the bus or the rail or in a transit facility, that is kind of an ongoing nuisance type thing or something that's of concern that maybe doesn't elevate to an emergency, maybe would be equivalent to like a Crime Stop call. Most cities have Crime Stop, non-emergency numbers. For us, that is what Alert VM is to us. It's a non-emergency notification.
Mhm.
So on the bus side, in order to make it equitable as possible, knowing that our constraints are we don't have a responsive security contractor that can go out and respond, and we want to make sure the expectations of the riders are there, is that Alert VM could be a tool, intelligence gathering for us. For example, I ride the Route 60 every day, these days a week, these hours, and there are these 4 kids that get on and cause just a nuisance for the operator and for the riders. They're loud, they're disruptive. Please help. That's great information for us to use now with our PDs because we've got actual Operation Blue Ride, which Dave has implemented with Mesa, Chandler, and Gilbert. Once we have those PDs, as they see these Operation Blue Rides focus on problematic routes with maybe systemic issues, where it's making the perception of security for our riders, maybe that level of uncomfortableness or concern, and primarily getting the information from the operators, we can then direct those police services to help us on problematic routes. That's how we see how Alert VM could be beneficial to the riders, but it just needs to be rolled out correctly so the expectation is there. Thank you.
Okay, additional questions? Mary?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Great presentation. A couple questions. I'm curious, I know it's not going to be a one-to-one, or maybe it's a bit of apples and oranges between your survey respondents, because the same respondents may have witnessed the same incident.
Right.
But I'm curious how this data compares to security incidents that Valley Metro may have tracked. And I know that the survey indicated that 1 in 4 report,
Mhm.
but from staff's perspective, I'd like to hear if there were surprises in the responses or if it was consistent with what you've been seeing and experiencing.
Mr. Chair, Ms. Goodman, I'll have Adrian address that.
Thank you for the question, members of the committee. Absolutely, the rider intercept survey in comparison to 2019, 2018, and now definitely resemble what we've seen in the system. My division, my security team, and including myself, ride the routes or ride the system itself and do what we call temperature checks. And when we conduct our temperature checks, we're getting firsthand observation and surveillances of our ridership and talking to the riders and seeing those behaviors. And definitely the outcomes of what the ridership is seeing on these intercept surveys is what we are seeing. The behaviors of the riders themselves has definitely changed. I know we're talking less and less about post-COVID, but I will say that that behavior during COVID started to take a front line or front seat when we were kind of hands off with inspecting fares, handling fares, we're keeping our distance, calling PD when necessary, taking action when necessary, but that behavior kind of took over. So that's our focus right now. And this ridership survey does mirror what we're seeing on the system, is the riders' behavior itself has worsened. The presence of security is heightened, but you see in the results, they want more presence. And that's what we get when we do our rides. We want to love seeing you guys, love seeing you, absolutely.
Thank you. I appreciate the comments, and I agree with your sentiments and that everybody should have an expectation to be safe when
Mhm.
utilizing the services. So thank you.
Yeah.
All right, additional questions? Jody?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hillary, this is a great action plan. And I get this is going to be a process.
Yeah.
But in Mesa, as we're updating our transit master plan right now, one of probably the number one comment we get is the perception that the system is unsafe, and that's across the board. And those comments are also then shared with our elected officials. So I think while we want to make sure our current riders feel safe and go, I think somehow when we go with this action plan, it would be great if we could look at how do we try to shift that perception and consider the non-riders and communicating some of that out to them, because that's what we hear a lot. And so just creating that bigger picture, like, it's okay, come ride with us type of thing. So if we can just consider that as we're going, that would be appreciated.
Yeah, thank you. We agree, and we'll work together on that. I'll add that we are working on sort of a storytelling campaign, more to come. I think what's the reality is the power of the service that we provide really impacts people's lives. And so sharing some of those stories, and we have a diverse ridership, as you well know, sharing those stories. I think we also see it as a potential rider attraction tool to see that people are in fact comfortable and using the system effectively. It's getting them to where they need to go. So I think there's a storytelling that we want to share, and I think it helps maybe a little bit some of those concerns. And we're also, Mr. Rell, we're happy to make this data available to you if you think it's a fit for any of your community or council needs.
I want to add, if I may, Mr. Chair, Mr. Rao, we'll talk about this in the board study session. So we track numbers, we track numbers of security incidents, and we have seen an increase in security incidents. It's an incredibly alarming. That and customer perception and our own observations is what has prompted this focus. But I do want to say that the system, it is safe. It's incredibly safe. You know, by the numbers, your chances of being harmed while using Valley Metro services relative to using, you know, an automobile or having a bike ride here in the Valley, transit is incredibly safe. But it's that, in part, that perception of safety, not just from the folks who aren't riding, but from the people who are riding. Because even if you're not harmed, but you feel unsafe or uncomfortable, that's completely unacceptable. So we're working on both that perception and the reality of incidents.
Andrew, you have a question?
Yeah, I guess it's just more clarification. It's understanding. I to your point about if something's happening on either light rail or streetcar or on the buses or any of the many, you know, riding options that customers have in Valley Metro region, they should call 911 if it's an emergency, right? That's not
Correct.
the presence or the absence of the Alert VM app should not be seen as a substitute for calling 911 when needed for an actual emergency. So how do we message that then as an organization? Because having that and the idea, and I think you're right, that if you offer someone an app and says, you know, if you see something, say something, and one way to do it if you're using light rail would be Alert VM. Okay. But it's not meant to be a substitute for calling 911.
Correct.
So while we want a response, that response is not going to be with the same speed and with the same sense of urgency as a call to 911, which would trigger an immediate emergency response. What is the target time for when someone says, I noticed that, I don't know, whatever, there's something going on at this light rail stop that I don't feel immediately threatened, but you should know about it and it looks unsafe. What is your expectation of how long it would take for someone to go out and address that?
So Mr. Ching, Mr. Chair, let me address the 911. You are absolutely correct. Alert VM is not a substitute for calling 911. Actually, when you pull up the app itself, it says if this is a true emergency, please not use this app and call 911 to create that distinction. I'll also say on the bus, I think for bus riders, we can create greater expectation about the use of 911 through some of our existing communications and possibly new ones. Adrian, I don't know if you want to address the expectation of response. I would say my team manages the responses that come in. They're the communications team that manages those. I would say again, several items come into Alert VM. It's maintenance concerns. It's a range of concerns that come in. They're immediately shared with their counterparts in the rooms and responded to, I would say, with a good amount of urgency. Like if they see a fare vending machine issue, that's sent off to the maintenance team and they're responded to by the team that's in the field. Same thing with Adrian's team. So I would say within.
Yeah, and the nice part about the tool for Alert VM is you get a person at the end of a terminal or a keyboard actually responding to you real time. So the responsiveness for a non-emergency, so for something that I'll use human trafficking as an example. Some people are not comfortable either in the position they're in, or they're not real sure, but they want to do something. So we have that actually on the drop down for Alert VM is human trafficking. Sending us that information is something for us to actually follow up on with the camera system and so on. But there's an actual response for the rider who's providing the information. I know that I'm trying to answer your question directly is that the expectation of a response would be from the person actually taking the Alert VM call. I know that also when riders communicate through Alert VM of an actual emergency, our representatives do an excellent job in asking specific questions, making sure they're not in any danger and no one else is in danger. And if they are, they have to ask them, please call 911, remove yourself from the situation and call 911. The dispatchers for PD always want to talk directly to the person who's experiencing or observing the incident. So relaying it third party is what we've been directed not to do. Hopefully we answer your
That all makes sense. And I guess part of the timeliness of the response, assuming we set aside those that should go to 911, is dependent upon the number of staff and resources you have in order to get people out in the field. And if 30% of the riders are on light rail, that means the 70%, everyone else, is in the far larger bus system. Is it fair to say that part of the reason why you can't expand or wouldn't expand Alert VM to bus is you'd also have to staff accordingly?
Yes.
And you'd have to have your resources to
Exactly.
be significantly staffed up in order to even have that?
Exactly.
Okay. So assuming that that happened, since it's not meant to be a substitute for 911, at some point, if that was a decision made by this body that you could extend it, it would really be a function of cost at some point. True?
True. True. Yes.
Cost and collaboration, because I want to go back to that point about engaging our law enforcement partners, who are often the people who are going to have to respond. So they have to have an understanding of how to interact with the transit system, how to board a bus, how to intercept that vehicle. So cost for the dispatch team, Hillary's group, who's answering the calls, perhaps cost for a Valley Metro security team, but that coordination with our local teams is important.
Absolutely, which it would be true to train local law enforcement as when the 911 call comes in to how to safely, intercept and stop a bus. If there's an active, someone brandishing a gun or something on a bus, you'd need to know all that now. And you would have to have known that for as long as those types of calls were able to be made mobile on things in a bus that require emergency response. What I'm suggesting is as we think about all of this, if this app, since 97% of your riders have a smartphone, that includes bus, if they have some way to report and understand the difference between there's a spilled drink or something on a bus that could be a slip hazard, as opposed to someone's actively, threatening passengers, there's some spectrum of things that would necessitate an emergency response versus things that are less emergent but still important. And when I heard alert, or was it Alert VM? When I hear alert, my first thought is that sounds a lot like 911 just from the name itself. So thinking about how you message and market that, it's those things that are important and we should respond to, but creating the expectation might be simply from the name itself. Because an alert tells me this is something I can go to if I feel unsafe and that I expect immediate response. Some of that has to do with how you message it. Perhaps.
Absolutely.
Just a thought. Thank you.
All right. Do we have any other questions from members of the committee? So I just have one question, which is on the action plan slide, you said funding opportunities for social services, and you mentioned partnerships. But can you elaborate on what you intend to do there?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. It's really high level at this point, and certainly we'll get into it more at the board study session. It's really one of the outcomes from our recent APTA peer review on safety and security was, and we're seeing this across our industry, is how do transit agencies partner or utilize social service providers, really the experts, to deal with some of the challenging behavior we're seeing on the system. So that is just exploration. It's looking at what are our peers doing. I mentioned the peer research, but also there could be grant opportunities or funding opportunities we're not aware of that could help us fund whatever path we end up going down potentially for that social service engagement on the system.
Great, thank you.
Sure thing.
All right, great discussion, great questions. Really appreciate everyone's input on this item. Again, not for action at this time. So we'll go ahead and move on to the next item, which is item 6, travel expenditures and solicitations presented for information only. Any questions on item 6? Okay. Report on current events and suggested future items. Do we have any updates from members of the committee or requests for future items? Seeing none, that concludes, yes.
Mr. Chair, I do have one item. We would like to pause, if we may, and recognize the contributions of Andrew Ching to the Transportation and Rail Management Committees. Mr. Ching has long been a contributor and a leader in public transportation. His insights are spot on, including present conversation about safety and security, and his work has really paved the way for improved transportation options for residents of Tempe and also the Valley. So we would like to present you, Mr. Ching, with a small certificate of thank you.
Oh,
If you would like to come on up and
You wanna wait
receive
until after the
said
meeting for this?
certificate.
all right. Thank you. That's very kind. Thank you. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Transit's super important to the region. And whatever contributions I've made, I hope it's been helpful and that the good work continues, of course. Thanks.
Okay, that concludes this meeting of the joint committees of TMC and RMC. So then we'll, just a reminder that our next meeting is not until August 2nd at 11 a.m. So that takes us to the Transit Management Committee meeting, which I'll convene at this time. And we'll go straight into item 1, which is the consent agenda. Do any members of the committee have any requests to pull an item or any questions on any consent agenda items? If not, I'd like to request a motion for approval of the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed, please say nay. Okay, motion passes unanimously. Item 2 is the Valley Metro RPTA fiscal year 24 preliminary operating and capital budget. And I'll turn it back to you, Jessica, for this item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the committee, I'd like to invite Ken Kessler, Chief Financial Officer, to the podium to present for the final time in TMC RMC this fiscal year an overview of the proposed budget and capital program. Mr. Kessler.
Thank you, Jessica. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, first want to start out by thanking your staff for all the input we've had. We've gone through the budget development process over the last several months and arrive here in June for the approval portion of the budget process. And it's been a very good experience. My first time sort of on this side of it. So working with staff and getting their input and suggestions has been very helpful. And I just want to express our appreciation. Also want to express my appreciation for my budget team, Tyler, and his team, as well as the various folks from throughout the Valley Metro organization who have contributed to the process. All these efforts from within the agency, as well as our member cities, has resulted in what I feel has been a very positive, smooth process this year. And I just want to recognize that. So just going through the budget very quickly, we've seen this a number of times. The operating budget here on the RPTA side, $231.8 million, no changes from when this was presented previously to this body. And here's the sources of funding. Again, the same numbers as we saw last month when we looked at this budget. The capital side, again, no changes to the capital budget from the last time we reviewed this with the committee. And same with the funding sources remain the same as last month. So no changes to this last round of the process. All the changes happened in previous months to update the numbers to get to the point where we now have final numbers for approval. Again, same with the pass-through funds. Again, the pass-through funds mostly to VMR from RPTA, as well as the Arizona Lottery Fund disbursements to the member cities. And the sources of those pass-through funds right here, $140.1 million in total for the year. And just do want to talk about the 5-year forecast for RPTA. So you can see here, this is the the 5-year forecast, about a $1.4 billion 5-year forecast on the operating side. And then just under $800 million 5-year forecast for the capital side on RPTA. So that brings me finally, after a number of months of going through this process of bringing the recommendation forward to the Transit Management Committee, staff recommends the TMC forward to the Board of Directors. Approval of the RPTA FY24 proposed operating and capital budget and acceptance of the 5-year operating forecast and capital program. And with that, that concludes my presentation. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ken, for the presentation. This is a presentation we've seen multiple times, so I appreciate that. Any questions from members of the committee? Okay, I'm not hearing any, so this is an item for action. The recommendation is on the screen. Does anyone have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the budget.
A motion for approval? Second. And a second. All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Please say nay. All right, motion passes unanimously. That takes us to item 3 on the agenda, which is the report on current events and suggested future items. Anything for this item by members of the committee or staff? Seeing none, that concludes the meeting of the Transit Management Committee. Thank you all so much. In a minute, we'll move on to the Rail Management Committee chaired by Mr. Ching.
All right, let's go ahead and convene the Rail Management Committee meeting for Wednesday, June 7th, 2023. First item on the agenda is the consent agenda. We have items 1A through 1C. Does anyone have any questions, or are there any items on the consent agenda that need to be pulled for separate discussion? Okay, hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Move approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Consent agenda passes unanimously. Next item, number 2, Valley Metro Rail, Inc. Fiscal year 2024 proposed operating and capital budget. It's Ms. Medford Miller to introduce the item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Again, I'll ask Ken Kessler, Chief Financial Officer, to provide an overview of the proposed operating and capital budgets.
Thank you, Jessica. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, again, similar as the RPTA side, just will run through the operating budget here. No changes to the numbers from the last time this was presented to the committee. Funding sources are the same as well. The uses of funds on the capital side remain unchanged from last month as well. And then I do want to get into a little more information on the 5-year forecast. So some high-level key assumptions on the 5-year operating forecast here. New service to come on board here with a few projects slated to complete within the timeline of the 5-year forecast. Some assumptions around fare revenues, average fare changes as a result of the new fare system, and some ridership forecast as a result of potential growth, as well as the new services that are slated to commence operations. And then there's a modest increase assumption consistent with the federal legislation for transit funding in terms of the federal preventive maintenance revenue that will be utilized for the system. The 5-year operating sources and uses for the 5-year period, a little over $500 million for the various projects that are going on on the operating side. And then on the capital plan, the sources and uses here, just under $900 million, again, based on those projects that are underway and that will occur here between now and FY28. So again, recommendation for the RMC to forward to the Board of Directors approval of the Valley Metro Rail FY24 proposed operating and capital budget and acceptance of the 5-year operating forecast and capital program. That's my presentation. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for the presentation. Are there any questions? Hearing none, this is an action item for today, so I would request a motion.
Move approval of the VMR budget.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor of the motion, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Item 2 passes unanimously. Item 3 is report on current events and suggested future agenda items. Are there any current events or suggested future agenda items? Okay. Hearing none, we'll close item 3. Item 4 is next meeting. The next meeting will be or is scheduled for Wednesday, August 2nd at 11 a.m. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.